I see this victim mentality taking over, especially a lot of younger people, whereby it's going to have significant impact on the lens by which they see the world. And that really freaks me out and it really scares me. And the second thing is this epidemic of conformity that we find ourselves in, where there's less focus on original thinking and creativity because there's more groupthink, there's more validation seeking, there's more impression management out there. So in regards to, victim status, if you look at, if everyone's a victim, no one's a victim. That's the first thing. And I think people are utilizing victim status to differentiate. Now, part of that is social media. Part of it is I want to be seen. I want to be looked at as different. I want more attention. The definition of victim, and in this case, I would say self-victimization, because victimization is another person becoming a victim. You either were the perpetrator or, you were part of that. So let's call it self-victimization, which essentially is victim coming from a state of weakness, is the action of, declaring yourself a victim of cruel or unjust treatment and enduring trauma and suffering in the process. Vulnerability comes from a state of strength. It's a willingness to show emotion, a willingness to allow one's weakness to be seen or known, or to risk being emotionally hurt, because you are coming from a place of strength to express yourself, to share a message, to follow your passion, to follow your purpose. And you're willing to take that risk from a place of strength in order to put that message out there. These two could not be more polar opposites. Yet people are saying, yes, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, I'm a victim. And they think they're going to gain strength from that. They are not going to gain strength from that. There's even a cycle that I talk about quite a bit, from victim to vulnerability. And victim is the beginning of the cycle. If you have been victimized, it's okay to feel angry, to protest, to be upset, because you're just coming into awareness of the victim status that you have, and you want to tell people about it, or you believe in a movement. We've seen all these movements that are happening. That's okay, but you can't get stuck in that victim status. You move through this cycle and eventually get to a state of vulnerability where you can take action on your feelings internally of being the victim at one point in time.
Mm-hmm. You said something a minute ago that you're not going to get strength from being a victim. That there's a confusion around that. People think they're going to get something of value from being a victim, and therefore are relating to the world through that victim sort of mindset, and almost virtue signaling, though virtue is not the right word, but trait signaling, I guess you could say. Hey, I'm a victim. Where some people are advertising to the world, but I would almost, it's not that I disagree with you, but I want to push back on the way you said it, because in some way, these people are actually getting something from the world, in some cases, in the current culture, by relating as a victim, because there is a group of people in the current culture that is wanting to praise or give value to people who are of this sort of in this victim mindset in many cases, and say, how brave of you to acknowledge, your victimhood. And I'm also finding that there's a culture around trauma right now where a lot of people have become kind of obsessed with their own traumas, and in many cases are kind of retelling the story of their life, really emphasizing what I would consider oftentimes pretty normal things, and framing them as traumas or as micro traumas, as framing them as these really bad things, and then framing trauma as something that is like a lifelong scar, this thing that harmed you and is forever harming you, and you carry with you, and it's forever like limiting you. I think that there's a dominant narrative around trauma that is framing things that way right now. Would you agree with me or disagree with me on that?
Yeah, so there's two things you're talking about. Let's talk about the trauma one first.
Okay.
100% I agree with you that there, first off, there are varying degrees of trauma. Trauma, the most significant trauma ever to one person can be absolutely debilitating. And unless they get true professional help to process that trauma, which could take their whole life if it was a really significant, severe trauma, that could just wipe out somebody. Whereas that same significant trauma in somebody else may not present as a really challenging event to them. It could be bad, it could be something they endured, but their coping skills were different. The baseline by which they see the world is different. Their support network is different. The capabilities that they came in with from a psychological perspective and their foundation were different. So from a trauma perspective, I do see more and more people, as you suggested, that see trauma as a lifelong scar, that use trauma in telling their story, which is fine, as long as you keep moving to go past the trauma. The trauma is not going to be something you just forget, but it's something that doesn't have to contain the same emotional value from a negative perspective throughout your life that you started with. Our scars don't have to dictate our future. And so when we look at trauma being advertised, I like the idea that people are more willing to communicate and talk about their trauma because it's a way of expelling it. It's a way of moving it through you and processing it. However, if you get stuck in your trauma and you define yourself by your trauma and you identify as your trauma, the individual you are, not the person who suffered from this trauma, but you have become the trauma, that's a real problem. And that's why, my background, one of the things I do is I was trained as a humanistic psychiatrist. And I say humanistic because no, it's not about just prescribing pills. There is a philosophical end to what I do and an existential end to what I do. And part of that is I am not, I tell clients when I used to own a treatment center and in mental health and personal growth. And I would tell people, no, you are not an anxiety patient. You are not bipolar. You are not depressed. You are not OCD. You are not ADHD. You are an individual. You are Bob. You have an entire aura, an entire energy, an entire person that you are who happens to be suffering from these symptoms. The constellation of these symptoms make up this diagnosis of ADHD. And there are many elements to how you move past this ADHD. So it's very important when you look at identification. And now to get to the first thing that we were talking about, which is this sense of victim mindset. And I'm not saying don't be a victim. Don't portray the anger, the protest, the sorrow, the worry. I'm not denouncing being a victim by any sense of the imagination. What I am saying is that victim is the first step in a cycle. You move from victim to vulnerability. And I don't want people to get stuck in a sense of victim mentality by which they then identify as a victim throughout their life to the point where they start to see the world through the lens of someone who is a victim, because then the world becomes a much more narrow, limiting, negative place whereby, look, if you look at some of the studies out there in the research studies on victim mentality, it's one of the primary reasons why people have a poor sense of well-being. The research is pretty clear on it that when you're stuck in a victimization stance or mindset, you're not promoting well-being. You can't forgive. You have a hard time with forgiveness. You personalize everything. You ruminate. You have intrusive information. You become unhappy, and those around you don't like to be around you because of it. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on this is that, there's many reasons that you can be and stay stuck in a victim mentality. I mean, first off, when you're a victim, there's, some people are victims. Let me just say, I want to think the best of people. So when someone is in a victim stance, and by the way, to negativity is part of being human. To endure pain is part of being human. You, me, name a person out there. We have all suffered. We all have the potential to be victims. I'm sure you've got a story where you were a victim. I've got lots of stories being a brown-skinned Muslim guy in the US when that's not really the popular way to be. I've been, discriminated against all the time, bullied, all sorts of stuff. Southwest Airlines has, my last name is Karim. Karim is like Bob in the world. And Southwest Airlines has my name on a watch list, the last name, which is like putting the name Joe or Bob on a watch list. So I have to go like an hour early just to go to the airport, an hour earlier than everybody else, because I don't know what's going to happen randomly when there's selection processes. Everyone's got some kind of a story. Now, some are really terrible tragedies of bullying and other things, and some maybe are not so much. But when you're in that victim stance, some people get lost in it, and it becomes a form of escapism from doing and activating other aspects of who they are. Some people go and stay in victim status because of community building, because you do enter a community of other people that feel the same way. And that's a good thing. That is not a bad thing. For some people, the victim status creates an expressive outlet for them. And it's a way to say, hey, this thing happened to me, and that's fine. However, you can't stay stuck in that. That is the biggest thing that I want to get out there.
Yeah. Do you see that there's a culture right now that's being reinforced that essentially praises the victim, that almost where people get social validation from being victimized, being part of a group that is victimized, that is a group that is oppressed in some way? I mean, I see in the young generation and especially the teenagers that I know, like family, nieces and nephews and things like that, that it is almost a constant obsession with the various ways that they're being oppressed or victimized in some way. And I know Jonathan Haidt has talked about this, and specifically why young girls today are so prone to depression, as a form of essentially negative CBT is how he calls it. I don't know if you've seen that, but negative cognitive behavioral therapy. It's essentially the opposite of cognitive behavioral therapy. It is training people to think in negative ways instead of positive ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. I am familiar with it. It goes back to what I was talking about, but the lens by which you see the world. So let's try to kind of break it down. First, you've got a culture that is raised on social media, and in that culture, there is social comparison, there is validation seeking, there is wanting desperately to stand out, to be seen, to be heard, to be accepted, to be validated, and in doing so, there's this promotion, as you said, this reward of victim status as a way of being distinctive, as a way of differentiation, as a way of gaining support, of gaining praise, of gaining some type of social validation and social reward. Okay, so now you've been rewarded for your victim status. Because you've been rewarded by that victim status, you start to identify as the victim status. You don't just suddenly go, okay, that's great. I was a victim then, and now I'm not a victim anymore. Cool. No, the socialization is kicked in. So now you start to identify and build a foundation with this victim status. And in the victim status, there's always the oppressor, the perpetrators, the ones who have done this to me. And forgiveness is such a huge part of that. You need to, the true victims, you forgive yourself and say, look, there was nothing I could do about this. There has to be self-forgiveness, and it's usually healthy, maybe not in all circumstances, but in a lot of circumstances, to eventually forgive the person, people, or group that was a part of that, for your own health, for your own mental health. If there's no forgiveness and the lens by which you see the world is a negative place where you're angry and you're upset by this whole thing, even if you're getting social reward, you're still coming from a place of anger and negativity. That's what Jonathan was talking about with this negative CBT. You are training your mind to look at the world with negativity. And that cognitive behavioral effect then is, eventually you train to develop permanence in how you see the world. Now, when you're looking at the world in a negative state, as I mentioned with well-being and the research on well-being, the world becomes a scary, dark, negative place. And you become more angry, and you become more impulsive, and you become more difficult to deal with. And there's more rage, and there's less ability to attract positivity, attract opportunities, attract deep relationships, because you're in that state. And then all sorts of things kick in: depression, worry, loneliness, all that stuff kicks in after that, and it just spirals.
There might be some people who are listening to this and maybe thinking that we're making a sort of traditionalist, almost patriarchal sort of argument in favor of mental strength over mental weakness, for example. I could see some people interpreting things in that way. My response to that would be essentially like, well, we have to have some universal agreement about what we're actually concerned about. And I think human happiness, human flourishing, the extent to which people are depressed would be a probably, or have anxiety or other mental health problems, would probably be a good measure that we could objectively agree upon, like to say, well, here's these people with these kinds of mindsets, and here are their propensity for depression or for anxiety, for other mental illness, and here's these people over here with other mindsets, and here's their propensity. So the argument that Jonathan Haidt makes is essentially, hey, young girls who have these kinds of ways of thinking, who are popular, are extremely prone to becoming depressed. That's kind of how I would respond. I'm just wondering how you would respond to maybe somebody who's criticizing our way of talking about this issue right now.
Well, I'll tell you where these ideas came from for me. They came from the treatment center I was running. When I look at mental health, the way I was trained at a very high-end, world-renowned institute, UCLA, the Institute for Neuroscience, and a number of things. I had great training, and I felt like something was missing in that training, but I couldn't really figure it out. But it was great biological training, great therapeutic training. And when I opened a treatment center, I took some of the best providers and best clinicians I knew to develop an integrative program where somebody would come in for a mental health problem or some kind of crisis, and we would do crisis management, move them towards stabilization. Some of that was, psychopharmacology. A lot of it was therapeutic measures, whether it was, family of origin work or cognitive behavioral or dialectical behavioral, or we even did some energy work and Chinese medicine and a number of things, nutritional work, all of that, to get them to a point of stabilization. And then, because insurance companies don't cover anything beyond stabilization, and most people have been trained in their mind to not focus on anything else once they're stable from a therapy perspective or a treatment perspective. And I don't mean therapy like once a week. I mean like coming in on a regular, like an intensive therapy. People would go home and maybe they'd go see their therapist once a week or something, but there was no more intensiveness to it. And, we would consult with people, we would talk to those clients and those patients, and they would be like, I feel fine. I mean, I feel okay, but I'm coming back to the same environment. I'm coming back to the same pressures. I'm coming back to the same work. I'm coming back to the same fill in the blanks. And so I said, I want to try to do something different here. I want to develop a program. You could call it an aftercare program. You could call it an extension. You could call it whatever you want to call it. But in that program, I want to completely focus on existentialism, identity formation, creative vision, to be able to see beyond your current circumstances. And that's part of, the moving out of a victim mentality. And I'm not, in any way denigrating victim, because it's something we all go through. It's that if you stay in victim, it's going to impact your mental health.
Yeah.
Yes, there are benefits of community. There are benefits of socialization. There's benefits of expression. There's many benefits initially to let out that emotion, to let out that anger, that feeling you have about having something done to you, or the injustice that occurred to you. That is very important, but don't get stuck there.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. And I've seen it play out. And when we put that extra program in, that aftercare program, we had phenomenal results. When I talk to those same clients, they'd be like, yeah, I just feel like I have more of a foundation. I have more of a belief system. I can see more potential opportunities that I can go. They had more confidence. They had more connection to who they are in a deeper way. And I call it more, they enhanced their cognitive flexibility. There was more soulful expression and connection in this disconnected society to who they really are originally. And that gave them the confidence to go do the stuff that they wanted to do, instead of just kind of letting the environment and for some of them, negative environment, dictate who they should be and what they should do.
I know about your personal background and how you grew up. And I think what you're doing now is such a massive contrast to the way you were originally brought up and kind of what your parents wanted you and envisioned you doing. And so I would love for you to just kind of talk about how that played out, because I feel like repression can either lead to just like be operating in that endless state of repression forever and ever, or it can potentially lead to you sort of busting out and then maybe going to the opposite extreme and like doing something totally at odds with what you were, kind of the box you were originally supposed to be in. So can you talk a bit about kind of your personal background and how you were brought up and how that connects to what you're doing now?
Yeah. My parents are both, medical people. My dad's a PhD doctor. He, funny enough, the irony of the whole thing is he invents a lot of medications to be given to pharma companies. So I knew the world. My mom's a nurse, and they know medicine. They're immigrants coming to this country. It's scary. So they want stability, and they love their kids. They want stability for their kids. So they're going to pick a really stable profession. So that whole stereotype of like, you're Indian, you must be like a doctor, an engineer, or an IT consultant is really true because they're stable careers. So being the eldest son in an Indian family, my parents are like, he's going to be a doctor, like doctor. That's it. So they literally made a pact. Like from the day I was born, my dad made an announcement in the labor and delivery ward. He's like, everyone gather around. I've decided he would be a doctor. And then, just like, so it's like everyone was on the same page. I was going to be a doctor. So there started this like Jedi mind trick childhood of no matter what happens, he's going to be a doctor. So like, when I would be in my crib and crying, my mom said my dad would come over and he would hold a little toy and he would whisper, doctor, like subliminal message. Every birthday, I didn't get Legos. I got a medical gift. For your 5th birthday, we go to an otoscope so you can look at people's ears. Like every Halloween, they dressed me up as a different type of doctor. The only way I was going to go to college where they were going to pay for it is if I was pre-med. So it was like, just hit me over the head. And then they were super negative about anything else I was good at. Like I would make these home, like those really big camcorders, like those huge ones. I had like a big camcorder when I was growing up. And so I would make these Saturday Night Live videos with my brother or with my friends, and they were pretty funny. And my mom was doing laundry one day, and she was realizing that like I'm getting better at this whole video thing. And so she'd be like, you're not funny. There's nothing funny about you. The only thing that would be funny is if you didn't go to medical school. That would be hilarious. You would be the laughing stock. Like it was intense.
Yeah.
Like medical school, or you're a total failure your entire life. And
yeah. No pressure, right?
No pressure at all, right? And the emotional programming of that. So this could happen to anybody. Yes. I mean, for me, it's this crazy, outrageous Indian story, right? But there are Italian parent stories. There are Greek parent stories. There are Hispanic. There are African-American. They're like, everybody's got a story from their parents. And maybe it's their parents. Maybe it's their uncle. Maybe it's a boss. Maybe it's an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend. Maybe it's a wife. Maybe it's a husband. It's somebody. And they leave this impression on you where you develop a certain amount of conditioning. And for me, this whole transformational process where I developed this Master Your Madness process came from, man, I am like a robot. I'm automated like a robot. I have been conditioned. There has been a chip or a plant like stuck in me, and I have to act a certain way and be a certain way. And I'm not being creative. I'm not being inventive. I'm not developing something new to help other people. I'm just a pre-programmed robot, and I got to snap out of it. I got to do something. So
from the day you were born, basically, this pre-programmed robot. Yeah.
And for like 40 years, I led that life.
Yeah. And it just as a cog in that wheel of that system that you were trained from the time you were a kid to be a cog in the wheel of.
Absolutely.
So how did you bust out of that? I mean, given what you just described about your childhood and those pressures and the cultural programming and the family programming, I would never imagine that it would be possible for anyone to bust out of that at some point.
Well, I'm sure you've talked about this, with other guests in your podcast and your work. We all know about pain, just the concept of pain. And most people think of it as like, I hurt my elbow or I broke my leg or something like that. There's emotional pain, which stress and, all the mental health issues and all of that. There's physical pain when you get hurt. There's also spiritual pain. And you could lump energetic pain in that, or you could even separate energy pain from that. And when you have enough pain in all of those dimensions, then the pain, what's that expression? Like when the pain of staying the same is worse than the pain of change, then you're going to change. And it got to that point for me where I was running a treatment center. I was only getting reimbursed by insurance companies when we prescribed or when we had a serious crisis. My entire life was dedicated to sickness and crisis. I was, as you said, a cog in the system. I was not making any like revenue to the point. I mean, I was making money, but breaking even basically. And it's not about the money, but to grow or to have more of an impact or to do something bigger requires you to generate more income. And I started to not be able to sleep at night because I was right in the trenches of the opioid epidemic, and I owned a rehab. So it was addiction and mental health and toxic relationships and like people that were really stuck in life. And so they were self-sabotaging, or their brains were hijacked by, addiction. So these people were suicidal, they were homicidal, they would get psychotic. They were in deep, deep, deep pain. And when I'm working with somebody like that, I take on their energy. I take on that darkness. I take on that pain because a lot of times they can't hold on to that pain themselves. So I share that pain with them. And, think about your most dramatic best friend or dramatic friend you've ever had, who's a mess, who's all over the place, who's super dark, disaster, like every minute things are changing. Now multiply that by 24. And that's what I was dealing with every day. And so eventually I just couldn't do it anymore. And I started to develop physical symptoms. A 2 millimeter disc herniation from a car accident turned into a 10 millimeter disc herniation with like shooting pains down my leg. I couldn't sleep. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel optimism. I didn't feel positive. I felt robotic. I felt stuck. I felt like I was in this repetitive cycle over and over again. And I just couldn't snap out of it. So, so it got so bad that, I needed back surgery at one point. And, that day that I got out of the surgical center, luckily, I'm knocking on wood right now in case you can't see, it worked. But I said, that's it. That's it. I'm not just making a career change. I'm not just making a philosophical life change of going from pathology to human potential, as a healer, as a thought leader, as a scientist, whatever you want to call me. But I am going to change the way that I look at my life from this day on, completely change it. And that's what I did.
Beautiful. Why do people want to transform? What drives that process of transformation?
I think innately, all of us are, we hear the expression, we're wired to connect. I think we're all programmed, not just technologically, not just like neuronally with our neuronal connections, but even spiritually, like deep down inside, we want to help each other. We want to be empathic. We want to be compassionate. And we have the brain chemistry, the mind connection, the neuronal synapses to feel good when we connect with each other and when we help each other. We're supposed to do that. So when you're stuck, and part of that connection is also connecting with yourself. And so that's it sounds so easy, but it's a very deep and complicated thing. Connecting to yourself means you're original. You're not a clone. You're not conforming to what other people want you to do. You're not doing the safe thing that maybe doesn't feel good, but it just keeps you in like living small. You're fully expressing who you are in your life in an original state with your innate talents, experiences, traumas, celebrations. You can learn a lot from your traumas. So you express and you develop the original you. So at some point in everybody's life, I don't care who you are, it could be when you're 80, it could be when you're 12, but at some point in your life, you're going to realize I am not aligned with who I am. Now, there might be the rare circumstance where somebody just their entire life was in full alignment. But for most people, you're going to realize it at some point. And usually it's after a traumatic experience. For me, it was, really suffering during my work and then having this physical, existential, spiritual change in my life, this toxicity. But for everybody, it's going to be something. And when that happens, that is your light bulb. That is your moment of transformation. That is your opportunity for transformation. Now, you can also work with somebody or elicit that feeling of transformation yourself. But you have to be there's a structure to it. You have to know how to feel. You have to know how to take in that feeling that will eventually elicit this response. And then you have to know what to do with it. Okay, I'm in this feeling. I'm in this state. Now what? How do I shift? How do I find my calling? How do I become more authentic? How do I develop this original state? Where do I come up with this innovation and these ideas that I know are floating inside of me? What do I do? And that's what I help people do.
Yeah. I want to come back to this moment of, you called it an opportunity for transformation. This moment of decision when people encounter that what they're doing is not aligned with their value systems, and they're suffering internally because of it. This feels like such a crucial moment in a person's life, and maybe there's multiple of these in their lives. But what are the consequences of not taking that opportunity for transformation? What are the consequences of not choosing to disrupt whatever you've built, whether you've gone to school for years and worked your butt off, or whether you've built a business and a practice and a clinic like you had? What are the consequences of saying, you know what, it's too scary to not to leave everything that I've built and everything I know and pursue this unknown of this other thing that feels like what I'm being intuitively drawn to. So I'm just going to stay here and keep doing what I'm doing. How does that play out in a person's life?
I'm in it right now. Like, I'm feeling how I felt when I hadn't changed, So it's like, I'm really good with words, but at the moment it's actually really hard because I was just feeling that when you were saying it. I mean, the repression is one of the scariest things you will ever encounter in your life. Like, repression is so painful. It's so toxic. It obviously leads to regret later on in life. It induces stress. It induces physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual pain. You have this deep gnawing sense that you should be doing something else with your life, but you don't know how to do it. You don't know how to shift. You don't know how to change. It's like you go through life knowing someday I'm going to do this. Someday I'm going to do that. Someday there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's, I'm doing this job and I don't love this job, but you know what? There's better things coming. And it's at one point in your life, you're going to realize that if you don't change, for most people, if you don't change something about the direction you're going, there'll be no light. They'll be, okay, now I'm old. And now you look at the rearview mirror and you look at what you could have done and you realize you didn't do it. And, I always cite this. There was an AARP study that looked at, they did a study in nursing homes and they talked to different, people that were in the homes about their lives. And they said, almost everybody has regrets. Nobody leads a perfect life. But it was always, I didn't do what I felt like I was destined to do, or my calling, or I didn't spend enough time with family or friends. I was constantly working and I was working in a job that didn't bring me fulfillment or satisfaction or enjoyment. I didn't feel like I was creating anything physically. And I don't ever want to feel like that.
Yeah. Why are most people so incapable of coming to those realizations in the moment when they're 25 and 35 and 45? And why is it that only, when we're in our 80s or 90s that we are coming to these realizations? Wow, I wish I would have done this other thing, and I wish I would have spent more time with my family. And what do you see as the big obstacles for people coming to those realizations much earlier in their life, such that they can actually take action and put themselves on a better path?
Yeah, I mean, two things to that. First off, anyone can transform and make a change. I mean, obviously, if you have a family, if you have a rent to pay, if you have a mortgage, if you have a bunch of bills, if you have debt and loans, it's hard, right? But there's always time and there's a way to shift. Even if you have to stay at the same job, or maybe you could find a job in your space, though, that brings you a little more satisfaction and joy. Maybe there's a different way you can talk to your colleagues or your boss. Maybe there's a different mindset you could have, even if you're in a toxic environment or a toxic relationship. There's always something you can transform and change. So I just want to put that out there first. Mm-hmm. But secondly, before you end up in that huge amount of debt, or you end up in a situation where it's going to be a lot harder, I think people don't realize how easy it is to live in a comfortable state. And like if you're going out and you're partying like all the time, and you're going to clubs, or you're going to restaurants all the time, or you're enjoying life, you're seeking pleasure, and you're enjoying life. It's fine, but how long are you going to keep doing that? At some point, you may have a desire, or there's like just a little thing that's lurking just somewhere inside of you that's saying, God, I wish I could invent something or create something or write something or play an instrument or be fulfilled in doing something else. Or in my field, I'd love to be able to think out of the box and not just do the same thing over and over again. There's something in there. There's something calling it out. And it's a matter of, are you tuned in to listen to it? You know, like when somebody has that moment of change, that wake up call, they need to make a decision to act on it. And it's like, you know, it's like at your house, the doorbell rings or your phone goes off. And are you going to answer it, or are you comfortable enough in your life and you're willing to say, you know what, if I get older and I don't accomplish what I really wanted to do or what I thought I should be doing, that's okay. If you make that decision, then fine. Live with the decision and live a great life. But if you've got something gnawing inside of you that you know you should be doing something else, then I would encourage everybody to listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to say on a personal note, and I when we talked in person a few weeks ago at the Mindshare Health Summit, I mentioned some of this to you. But for me, I had that moment. I spent several years working my butt off, doing pre-med, getting amazing grades in college so I could get accepted into medical school. My original plan, I had already been, I never really wanted to be a conventional medical doctor. My plan was, because I had already been studying natural health and nutrition and exercise and lifestyle medicine for a decade at that point, I really wanted to get an MD and then be a force for change, be a force for shifting the paradigm towards one that incorporated more nutrition and lifestyle therapies. And I unfortunately discovered from basically the first week of medical school that my attitudes weren't really welcome there. And that I was looked at by my classmates and by my teachers as a crazy person. And I couldn't stand the paradigm, and I couldn't stand the fact that there wasn't a single nutrition class taught in the entire medical school curriculum when 80+% of the entire medical burden is diseases that are directly attributable to nutrition and lifestyle. And I every week I was on a phone conversation with my brother. I hate it here. I think I made a mistake. I think I need to get out of here. And it was like, it's only 4 more years. You got this. It's only 3.5 more years. You got this. It's only 3 more years. You know, and I did basically 2 years. I went through the entire medical school coursework for the most part. I almost at 2 years. And when I started getting in the hospital and I was in the internal medicine ward dealing with people with diabetes or cardiovascular disease and seeing people who are on 10 or 12 or 15 or 18 different pharmaceuticals being taught nothing about nutrition and lifestyle, it drove me insane. I was literally, I thought this was the height of absurdity that this was going on, that you have people with diseases of lifestyle being taught nothing about nutrition and lifestyle on just a dozen or more prescription medications. And like, I wanted desperately to teach them something about nutrition and lifestyle, and I was just silenced. I needed to shut up, I was going to get kicked out of the program, or, you know, and I knew that I couldn't handle another. It wasn't just 2 more years to get the MD. It was then I was going to have to be in a residency for 4 or 5 years in the hospital environments doing that same thing, tolerating that, having to silence myself, because if I said anything and taught that person anything about nutrition or lifestyle, that's deviating from standard hospital protocols, and then I can be kicked out of my residency at any time. Yeah. And so it gnawed on me. My health deteriorated. I was severely depressed, suicidal, lost like 30 pounds. My hair's falling out, terrible insomnia. And I mean, I was just absolutely suffering. My soul was suffering in that environment. And I made what was the hardest decision for me at that time, which was to leave and go start teaching people about health in the way that I wanted to teach, and not keep pursuing this path that was destroying my soul and sucking the life out of me. It was a very, very hard decision at that time, but I am so glad that I made it, because now I'm filled with life and joy and helping so many more people, and not having to suffer that soul sucking fate that I would have had to go through for the last 8 years since then.
Yeah, it took me a long time to realize that traditional medicine, don't get me wrong, I'm a physician. Traditional medicine is great for what it is. But what it is crisis. What it is we're going to put a diagnosis on you, and you're now going to enter a system by which, we have a certain cookbook way of doing things. And we're not going to deviate from this system once you're in this system. But do I think it's good for lifestyle measures? No way. Like, do I think it's good for human potential and optimism and growth and moving beyond crisis to stabilization? No way. Like, it's good for what it is. And I realized that, look, I would never want to trade in my medical knowledge base. I think and you did a couple years. I mean, what's frustrating is the way that knowledge is applied. But the knowledge itself is pretty cool. I mean, is it all encompassing? No, but it's a good start. And then you kind of grow from there. And, well, I want to learn more about nutritional medicine. Oh, I want to learn more about spiritual medicine. Oh, I want to, it's a great starting point. And then you build off of that with a whole bunch of other, other disciplines.